In the previous chapter, we learned about the demographic transition model. Now we can take that and apply it to migration. And so, in fact, we could say that this is also the migration transition model. And to do this, we can understand it because the same ideas apply, in which there's certain patterns in which stage 2 and stage 3 countries are places in which they are sending migrants. So these are places in which people are leaving. Now, this is on average. This is the whole, this, you can't say this for every single stage 2 or stage 3 country. But on average, stage 2 and stage 3 countries, once again, there are no more stage 1 countries, but stage 2 and stage 3 are often going to be the places that are sending migrants. And where are they going? More often than not, to stage 4 countries. Now, we do see some overlap there. What I mean by that is those countries that are transitioning from stage 3 to stage 4 are often places that are going to be attractions. And so we saw this in the previous chapter. We saw stage 2 countries having very, very, very negative net migration rates, whereas stage 4 countries having more of a positive net migration rate. And then those countries that are around 0 or just -1 or 1 are typically going to be those stage 3 countries in which they're transition areas. And so this is the migration transition model, which overlaps very much with the demographic transition model. So we can relate the stages in which the places that are most likely to be seeing an out-migration, those most likely seeing an in-migration, but we can also look at the different stages in terms of the type of migration. And so throughout most of human history, like I mentioned beforehand, we were stage 1. So we're talking about 200,000 years of history. And those we definitely equate to hunters and gatherers. And so we were always on the move. And so daily and seasonal migration dominates. And so the main type of migration you would have found in stage 1 countries was a daily or seasonal migration. That makes sense because it relates to foraging, hunting and gathering and all of that. But the countries that are stage 2 and stage 3, what's characterizing them more than anything is international migration. Not saying that there's any other type of migration in those countries. It's just there you see a large number as far as domination as far as the migration type is international in its nature. It's people leaving one country to go to another country. Now, in stage 4 countries, it's more internal migration, and so you don't see, you do see, people moving from one developed country to another developed country, but overwhelmingly, the international migrant is moving from a stage 2 or stage 3 country to a stage 4 country. Once you're in a stage 4 country, after a couple generations, you definitely see internal migration dominate. What do I mean by that is, for example, suburbanization, moving to the suburbs, moving back to the city, your daily commute to work, and moving from one city to another, moving from Indy to Chicago, moving from Cleveland to Indy. All those are examples of internal migration. And that's going to be something that's more characterized by stage 4 countries. So in some stage 1 countries, in which we don't see any anymore, but throughout most of human history, characterization as far as the type of migration that dominated daily and seasonal migration. Stage 2 and stage 3, you're going to see more international migration, in which people are leaving, going from one country to another. And I've already explained as far as the patterns there. Internal migration is patterns within. People moving from one part of the city to another part of the city. People suburbanizing. People coming back to a city. Young people moving back to an urban core. Those are all examples of internal migration which dominate or are the key main type in most first stage 4 countries. Here we have our case study countries. So we have our list of all of them. So I've already explained in a previous chapter as far as how we came up with their DTM stage, this demographic transition model stage. And that's found over there on the right-hand side. But nonetheless, you see some particular patterns. Stage 4 countries, Germany, Italy, United States, are destinations for a lot of migrants. And so that makes sense, going back to the migration transition model. Further, we look at countries, for example, Afghanistan. We could also look at Haiti. Those are countries that have, on average, high birth rates but declining death rates. So when you have high birth rates, declining death rates, quintessential or great example of a stage 2 country. And so what dominates there is international migration. And so in Afghanistan and Haiti, you see a lot of people leaving those countries going to another country. In the case of Haiti, you see a lot of migrants moving to the United States, for example. But nonetheless, we can see some patterns here. So where do we see net migrations that are the most negative? Well, we see them in those stage 2 countries. Where do you see it the most positive? In the stage 4 countries. Of course, transitions are occurring where we see a lot of zeros in the net migration rate for 2015, and that's because those are places that once again are stage 3, transition is stage 4. Sometimes they're going to be the destination for migrants. Sometimes we're going to see migrants leaving those countries, but they're definitely a place where they have a lot of people coming, a lot of people going, and so thus the net migration rate is 0. And so nonetheless, from the case study countries help to further showcase what I've mentioned in the previous examples as far as the migration transition model. We see stage 2, stage 3 countries are people leaving. Where are they going? They're going to stage 4 countries.